Good morning.
Good morning, Chavra. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Demai, Perek Beis, Halacha Gimel. We are actually in the middle of Halacha Gimel. It began on that few Testament Beis. Previous sugya was, how does one go from being an Ama'aretz to a Nemon, which is only Nemonus Benegeya Trumas Maisres, and now Behem Shachozeh, we are learning how one will become even a chaver. And just to quote words that we didn't say on that few Testament Beis before we give our introduction, in the Rash Arilio, in middle of the left side, Leo is chaver. Like, why do we use the word chaver, a friend? So the Rash says beautiful words. This person is upgrading his adherence to all of the nuanced details of mitzvahs. The motivating part here is because he doesn't want to do anything that will bring someone else into a violation. In other words, his upgraded status is connected to his care and concern for another. That's why he's called a chaver. Beautiful. So how do you become a chaver? So quickly, just re-quoting the first steps, the specific Kabbalah commitment that you have to make in public. Let's go with the Rash Arilio in front of three people. Number one, that he will not sell chulin that's tahar to an Ama'aretz, whether the chulin became wet prior or not, even yavesh, because we don't want to bring tuma to chulin, which is a stringency midrabanan, but that's the whole point of a chaver. He will not buy from an Ama'aretz produce that was once made wet. That's where we left off. We're going to continue on Daf Chaf Amud Aleph to learn other specific Kabbalahs that this person has to make in order to become the chaver. And as we will see, that a chaver, number one, an Ama'aretz is tamei by default midrabanan, but the tuma on the body midrabanan is a lesser level of tuma. We'll learn this out today. On top of that, even more serious is that midrabanan, the clothing of a Hama'aretz, is suspect to be midras, which means it can be tamei midrabanan. We presume that it's tamei on the level of an av. That's a very high level of tuma, and that will be that piece of information will help us understand why does the person who's becoming a chaver have to make the specific Kabbalahs that we'll learn in the Mishnah. In the Mishnah, we're going to have the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda that will make more obligation on this person to becoming a chaver by broadening the types of commitments that this person needs to make, broader than only from the area to the adherence of Tuma and Tahara, as we will see. And by the way, we're going to learn in today's daf that even during the beginning time of the Amirayim, we still had the Ephod Para Aduma, completely not connected to the temple, and it was actually used by people, as we will see. Now, we did have in the previous sugya a Rabbi Yoina and Rabbi Yosi that will repeat when we learned the Gemara inside, as they were explaining the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda in the previous Mishnah. That will be brought back into our sugya, and we're going to have on Daf Chaf various braisas that will tell us and give us exemptions of perhaps some peoples that don't need to make this formal Kabbalah in order to become a chaver. And finally, if we'll have time, when a person does become a chaver, it's not 0 to 100 in 1 second. That we first, it's a stage, it's a step-by-step. There's a Kabbalah concerning the Tilas Yadayim. There's a commitment to some types of practices. Then there's a Kabbalah to more types of Tum and Tara practices, until the person makes the final Kabbalah, becoming a bona fide chaver. All the way on top. Again, the Mishnah is in the middle of specifying the specific Kabbalahs, which means resolutions or commitments that this person has to make in public. One is concerning buying and selling chulin from Ama'aretz to Ama'aretz, and then he has to make a hachlata, guys, on top, mamash on top of the Amid, the Einoim Disoreach Eitzel Ama'aretz, that he is committing not to be hosted by the Ama'aretz. That we have to clarify We're speaking about someone who's already a Neman. A Neman, to become a Neman, we learned in the previous Mishnah, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, you also have to commit not to be hosted by the Amoritz. So why is it over here in our Mishnah? That should be a given. The answer is because what we learned in the previous Mishnah is that Amoritz is making a commitment not to be hosted by someone who is a Amoritz. But in order to become a Neman, all the person needs to commit to is that he won't be hosted by the Amoritz, but he's allowed to be hosted by another Neman. A Neman can go to a Neman. But a Neman is someone who's not yet trustworthy when it comes to Tum and Tara. So even though the Balabas is already a Neman, he has to make a new commitment. Let's say that Reuven is a Neman, but Reuven is not a Chaver. So this guy has to commit, I won't even go to Reuven, because he's not yet a Chaver. Now another din, another detail that we did not have before, and that is that he will not host an Amoritz. Now, the other way around, I can host an Amoritz. The answer is yes, but no. He cannot enter my home with his clothing. Wow. Because midrabanan, the tuma of an Amoritz, right, the tuma, the level of tuma, is not as problematic as the tuma midrabanan that his clothing have. If we suspect that he is tamei, the worst he can do is he can convey tuma to rendering things into a sheni. That means we are concerned that if someone is tamei, he should not touch food, making it into something that's tamei, which is already not so good. But much worse is that we suspect that his wife, who was a nida, sat down on his clothing, which is something common. You can put your clothing on your bed, and the unique din of a nida and a zava and a yoldas is that they convey what we call tumas midras, which means that if they sit upon something that's meant to be sat upon, not only do they convey tuma, but that item acquires the same level of tuma that they have. In other words, we are afraid that his clothing is an av. Now, that is something we have to keep out of our homes. The tuma midrabanan on the person himself is not on the level of an av, but we suspect that his clothing is an av. So even if I'm going to host an Amoritz, he can only come to my house by prior to wearing my clothing. He's an avlad. He's a rishon midrabanan. He cannot even make my clothing tummy. In other words, there's no problem with me giving my clothing for him to wear when he's in my home. Look inside the Rashirilio, on the right column, the third Rashirilio. The enam orcha yetzle biksusay. Kide parishna, like I already explained. Mishum bigdei Amoritz, we are afraid that it's bigadim are tomei midas. But what could you do? Aval oimer lo, you are allowed to tell the Amoritz, shoy bigadcha. Come over to, I'm going to host you. Before you enter my home, take off your garments. The lavush begadim achedim, and you wear my garments that are tohoirim, gavaldik. And then you can have him over. Now, back in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, there are other resolutions or commitments that this person has to make to become a chaver, even though they're not related to Tum and Tar. Number one, the person has to make this commitment, this Kabbalah, not to raise small domesticated animals. And as we learned in Bavli, Babakamadav Ayin Tes, that the Chachamim don't allow us to graze small domesticated animals in the Holy Land because they tend to go around and to graze all over the place, which means that they will go into the fields of my neighbors and eat their food. So I am, so to say, involved in theft. To become a chaver, you have to make a commitment not to do that, even though no one is allowed to do that. But you have to specifically commit to that. Another Kabbalah that you have to make, nor ubas chayik. So when we learned the Sechlis Nadarim, and as nowadays it became almost common practice that people constantly say bli neder, and that's a good practice that evolved over time. The other alternative would be the opposite side of that is that people that are constantly making Nadarim vows, and even though when the person makes the vow he plans to keep it, it's very serious for a person to violate his own neder. And if you keep on making the darim, sooner or later you're going to violate them. So it's funny, you would think that making a neder is a sign of someone being very machmer, right? He's vowing not to do this and not to do that. No, don't do that. Don't make a formal neder. Number two, schoik is a certain type of frivolity that can lead to immorality, like you have in Pirkei Avos, schoik v'kalos roish, right? Margilim esa alam la'erba. So that's another type of commitment that this person has to make. Furthermore, v'lo yehem betama l'meis. Now, v'lo yehem betama l'meisim, guys, there's no why and why only Rabbi Yehuda. Very interesting. Look inside the Rashi Elio at the end of the right column, the last Rashi Elio on the right, 4 lines from the bottom. The Sfira Leila Rabbi Yehuda, the ein mezumen loy efer para, because at the time Rabbi Yehuda already felt. Now, guys, this is after the Churban Habayis. It's difficult to find the ashes of the paraduma. So a chaver, to become a chaver, you don't have to commit not to become tamei with other tumais. You know why not? Because become tamei and go to the mikvah and become tar. No problem. With the only unique tumah that already became difficult to become purified from Bisman Rabbi Yehuda was tamei mesim. Avo legabi keri. You don't have to commit, right, to abstain from having tumas keri, because the tefillah sagi lebe beis tefillah, because all you need to do is to go to the mikvah. That's something that's shchiyah. Now the Rashi Elio adds, "V'rabbanan sabri," the Chachamim who don't hold that you have to make such a commitment, even though this is indirectly related to Tum and Tara, because if I'm going to become Tomei L'Tumei Meis, automatically when I'm going to eat, I'm going to make my food Tomei. So why didn't the Chachamim hold, even though they don't broaden the commitments, but they definitely demand for a commitment to be made in the world of Tum and Tara? So what's about that? The Chachamim hold the Efer Para Nami Shchiach. Wow. And then the Rashi Elio adds, and if you're going to ask, they made Rabbi Yehuda is not from the times of the Tanoim after the Churban Habayis. Efer Para Minayin. How did they have the ashes of the red Efer? Muchach b'Masechtas Nida. Look inside the last line on the right column of the Rashi Elio. The Af Bisman HaAmayroim, that even in the times of the Amayroim, Hoyel Lahem Efer Para Shenishar Lahem Misman Habayis. So it's almost like, again, a machlokes and mitzias. It's not really that way. Is that we still had the ashes of the red heifer lasted for hundreds of years after Churban Habayis. Question is, how do we gauge its availability? Rabbi Yehuda considered it something already that wasn't that available. So to become a chaver, you have to make a commitment not to be metamel mason. Now, of course, there are exceptions. If a kohen is allowed to be metamel mason for his 7 close relatives, for sure, a Yisrael could and should, that's your kibbutz ava aim, etc., to be part of the burial. What we mean to say, not where there's a mitzvah involved, not where it's a mesa mitzvah. Okay, now back inside the Mishnah. Now again, we're going away from the Tumantara details. According to Rabbi Yehuda, a chaver also has to commit umeshamish bebeis hamedrash. Pashat, to be a meshamish in the beis hamedrash. Now, what does it mean to be a meshamish? That Rashi Elio says on top of the left column that v'loy made in Talmidei Chachamim b'yeshiva, that meshamish means to learn with Talmidei Chachamim v'yodeya perush hamishnayis, in order for you to know, right? They didn't have Gemaras printed, so everyone knew Mishnayis. But what does the Mishnah mean? No, it's to be around people that are teaching you how to learn properly. And then you have the Pashat Taich also of Shimush Talmidei Chachamim, that a person should be servicing Talmidei Chachamim. So Amrullah, the Chachamim tell Rabbi Yehuda, even though every single thing that you mentioned is of great importance, but Leibo Elu Laklal, they should not be included. They should not be included because they're not connected to Tum and Tara. In other words, the Chachamim keep the commitments Tum and Tara related. Metamel Mesim Tum and Tara related. That was the Rashi Elio. They held that there was enough availability of the Afar Para Aduma, a person doesn't have to make such a commitment. Rabbi Yehuda, aside of the detail of the Para Aduma, holds that to become a chaver, you have to have this broader types of commitments, and especially as we learned in the Rashi Elio, that part of being a chaver is to behave in a way where you won't be machshel other people. So it makes also more sense. It's being mashal other people is not only in the realm of Tum and Tara, but more on that is we'll learn when we come into the Gemara. But let's begin. So the first part of the Mishnah, which we began in the last year, is that the first Kabbalah that this person who wants to become a chaver has to make is Eloi loikeach mimenu lach, right? When the Mishnah spoke about his first commitment was not to sell, that was not to sell food, lach nor yavesh, but when it comes to his commitment not to buy produce from the Am Haaretz, he only has to make a commitment not to buy produce that already became wet, which implies, as the Gemara, hayavesh, if the Am Haaretz is telling him, listen, I have grain that never became wet after Ksira, then he's allowed to buy it. And that proves something extremely important. And I know we mentioned it before, but it's good to mention it again, that one should not misunderstand that the Am Haaretz is someone who is not trusted because he's not an honest person. We don't view it that way. The Am Haaretz was someone who, because of his or her ignorance in the detailed halachas of Tum and Tara, became lax. So when they say they kept something, they mean it. Very much like today, when you go to a person and they tell you, you can eat in my house is kosher. In most cases, the issue is not that you don't trust them. They believe their home is kosher. Maybe don't eat there because they don't know enough halachas, and their home might not be kosher, unbeknownst to them. That's the issue with the Am Haaretz. So how do foods become muchshar l'kabel tum? It's very simple. After it's tolush min hakarka, b'ritzoin habalim, it became wet with one of the halachic 7 liquids. I know that's a mouthful, but relative to the laws of Tumah and Tara, it's a simple halacha. Everyone knew that halacha. Everyone knew that. And therefore, if an Am Haaretz is going to tell you my foods never became muchshar, he knew enough, she knew enough, and they're trusted enough to believe that what they're saying is true, and you could buy the produce from them. Whether it's muchshar or not. Where do they lose their nemanus? On the other parts of halacha that are complex. So they were ignorant. And one solution for an ignoramus is not to go ahead and to learn, but to convince oneself that I know it all. That was their problem. The Tani came, and the Gemara says not only is it implied from the Mishnah, but it's explicitly spelled out in the Braisa. Neman am haaretz loimer haperos halali lo yochsharu. If he makes a statement that they never became muchshar, we believe. But where does he not have nemanus? If he were to say, yeah, they got wet, it never acquired tuma. You know why we don't believe him? Because he might think he knows hilchis tuma and tara, but he doesn't know it. So the chashash is that it became tamei unbeknownst to him. So it's not that much about trustworthiness. It's more about laxity and ignorance. Okay. Says the Gemara, going back to the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, when Rabbi Yehuda added more hachlotos, more kabbalos, Rabbi Yehuda prefaced his statement by using the word af. And what does af mean then? Af means he also must commit. Also means that he agrees with everything that we learned above. Ha, says the Gemara, meaning from the word af, michlal du moidal kamaisa. It means he admits, he agrees that all of the prior Kabbalahs specified by the Tanakama is something that also has to be made by Rabbi Yehuda, which includes, right, the one that we started today with, top line in the Amid, ve'enoi misareach eitzalam haaretz. Now we got a problem. And now let's quickly review what we learned, the sugya in the Gemara, that when the person is going from an Am Haaretz to a Neman, and after he made the Kabbalah not to be hosted by an Am Haaretz, Rabbi Yehuda said in the Mishnah, what happens if he took an invitation? If he took the invitation, Rabbi Yehuda says he doesn't lose the Nemanus. Because that's the way the world works. When someone invites you, not everyone has the capacity to say no. But the question there was, what exactly is Rabbi Yehuda saying? And we had a machlekes in the Gemara, right? We're getting familiar that in the Yerushalmi, Rabbi Yoina, Rabbi Yosi are two classic Amiroim that argue with each other. And what was their machlekes? That Rabbi Yoina understands Rabbi Yehuda that even if he posed his resolution, went and yes, accepted the invitation from the Am Haaretz, what we say is that while he was there, he didn't eat. And like the two ways, like Danny pointed out, either because we trust that the host Taka was ma'ased everything, or because we say he was ma'ased it himself in a very discreet way. But even when he went there, we never say that he ate. That is the way Rabbi Yoina explained Rabbi Yehuda in the previous Mishnah. But guys, halka. So Gemara is asking now that Rabbi Yehuda is adding, which means he accepts that one of the things you have to do to go from Neman to Chavar is to make the Kabbalah that I won't be hosted by Dama Aretz. Leis Hada Pliga Alde Rabbi Yoina. Does that not imply that we can refute Rabbi Yoina's understanding in the previous Mishnah? How was that? Explains the Gemara beautifully. The Rabbi Yoina Amar. Rabbi Yoina says Chavedim Enam Chashudim Loy Lachol Loy Lahachol. Guys, the word Chavedim in this context means a Neman. Okay. And we're saying that what? We're saying that even when he goes there, he'll be careful not to eat. So look inside. So what's the kasher? Rashidilio has the right, has Gavaldic words. Guys, Rashidilio, 6 lines before the bottom of the left column, in middle of the Rashidilio, the kasher, the Rabbi Yoina, the El, the Omar, the Chavedim, the Hainu. The word chavedim in the previous sugya doesn't mean chavedim over here, right? Tahainu oyhavim einam chashudim, that these people are not. We don't suspect that when they were invited out they ate. Ubemadai shechavedu lo yachshilen v'mashu nimna v'lo yivelenu right? That the host for sure did not give him something that's untied. So va'amai boy lekabul shelo yisareach etzel chavedi amaretz. Why does he even have to make such a hachlata? When we so the Einam Esarech Eitzel Ha'Ma'aretz. Oh, I want to just add one more layer. In the previous Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda said, Danny, that if he went there, he doesn't lose the Nemanus. Does not lose the Nemanus. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't make the statement over here. Rabbi Yehuda does not make the statement over here. In other words, over here, when he makes his hachlata that he's not going to be hosted by the Ha'aretz, here, if he is hosted by the Ha'aretz, he's going to lose his nemanus. Why will he lose his nemanus? According to Rabbi Yoina, just like Rabbi Yoina said that this guy will be careful, whether the host will be careful, whether the neman will be careful, why wouldn't we say the same thing over here? And answers the Gemara, there's a big difference. That it's shaykh for me to go to your house, David, and not to be nichshal in having untied food. That's something that's easier. Whether the host will take off all of even the trumas meiser and the meiser sheni, whether the person won't eat, whether the person will do it himself, it's much easier. But if this guy is going to go to the house of an Ha'aretz when the concern is about becoming tamei, that is something that you cannot avoid. So when you're going to go there, you will become tamei. And even if the host is going to serve you food that was tied until that point, you will become tamei there. And then you're going to be metama your food. And that's why it's much more chamor here than in the Mishnah above. Weiter says the Gemara, Vafilu al Rabbi Yosei leis hadab pliga. This will not even be a problem with Rabbi Yosei. Now, by Rabbi Yosei, it's much worse. Why is it much worse? Because what did Rabbi Yosei say above? Rabbi Yossi says that when it comes to the social challenge, you're being invited and you're not going to go, we tolerate for the person who just became a Neman, and we say that even if he went and even if he ate untied food, which means that while he is in the home, he lower the standard, but when he'll leave the home, he'll right away go back to his newfound status of being a Neman. So why wouldn't Rabbi Yehuda say the same thing over here, though? Why don't we say that? But why wouldn't Rabbi Yehuda say? But if he was invited out, I know the Gemara just says that you can't avoid becoming tummy. Okay, so he'll become tummy. But why wouldn't we apply the same logic over here? That's a much bigger kasha. Let's read the kasha inside. It's not a problem. What would be the problem? Because the Rabbi Yossi Amar Chavedim Chashudim Loichal Ve'enim Chashudim Lahachel, that when you went to be a Neman, even if you accepted the invitation, and even if we suspect that when you are in the home of the not Neman, you fell. Nevertheless, you don't lose your Nemanus. So if that's the case, why wouldn't Rabbi Yehuda say the same thing over here? That what? That even though he has to make the initial hachlata not to go to be Mesoreach Eitzel Ama'aretz, right? Ama'aretz meaning by someone who doesn't know the laws of Tum and Tara, but why wouldn't Rabbi Yehuda say, according to Rabbi Yossi, if he went there, when he's there, we suspect that he became Tameh and a Chanami. It's almost impossible to avoid becoming Tameh in the house of the Ama'aretz. But nevertheless, when you leave, the guy's going to go to the mikvah and let him retain the status of Chaver. Why don't we say it over here? So it's much bigger. The kasha with Rabbi Yossi is much stronger. Answers the Gemara, Taman over there, meaning over there when the issue was just about Trumas U'Maisres, since the only now the girsa has to be Lemaisrois, that's where we have to go, right? Over here we're speaking about the Harois. This is very important. In other words, Haneman ala Taharois, and actually these are words of Abraisa, Neman ala Maisres, but not the other way around. Look inside the let's go with the Pnei Moshe, right? 3 lines, 4 lines from the top. Haneman ala Taharois, Kidamrin Eliel, Umishum the Taharois Chamire. First of all, it's much harder to remain taught. And void Shehei Midrabanan Umaisrais is Midoiraisa. So listen to this concept, which is Gavaldik. When a person knows that what they are doing is potentially in violation of a Do'iraisa, it makes sense that the person would be more cautious. That's the attitude to begin with. And therefore, number one, he needed to make a hachlata not to be Mesoreach Eitzel Ama'aretz. Number two, according to Rabbi Yossi, according to Rabbi Yehuda, even if he went there, and even if he was nachshal by being weak and being embarrassed and not wanting to insult the host, and he ate foods that were not Trumo Meiser, not Meiser Sheni, we are going to say that he made such a resolution in public, he left the house of the Ama'aretz, he's going to go back to becoming a Neman because you're dealing with a Doirais. The issue with the Ama'aretz, again, it's not that much that we don't trust him, is that he wasn't knowledgeable in all of the details. And the ikir will be, is that an Ama'aretz, by default, has a tuma on his goof midrabanan. When the guy weakened himself, when he was weak and he accepted the invitation and he went there and he became tama there, what will he think to himself? Okay, sometime midrabanan nishgeferla. People minimize the drabanan. That's why the moment he went to the Ama'aretz, he loses his chaver shaft. That's the way the Pnei Moshe explains it. And here we don't have a Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda that will tolerate it post facto. Here there's no tolerance. People do tshuva, you know the difference between a chatos and an asha. It's much easier to do tshuva when you know you did something wrong. When what you did, you don't feel what you did is that wrong. You might not do it, but once you did it, it's harder to kricha out of that. Okay. That's the way we'll go with that understanding. Says the Gemara. Funny, we learned in a brayz. Kol haba means someone doesn't yet have the status of a chaver. And what we are learning the last few days is that you have to make this formal commitment, amazing, to upgrade your status. Sarech lekabel alav. Who has to make the commitment? Afilu chaver. Wow, we look inside the Rashirilio, 4 lines from the top of the right column. Sarech lekabel alav. Divrei chavrus. Every single detail, Hamifurashim and Mishnah Seinu, and in addition in the Tosefta, Ubeperek at Kama, and in Perek Kama we learned that Rashi is just reiterating his opinion that this Kabbalah Mefaresh should tzarech sheikabel all with a gimel chavedim that are already purushim hamuchzakim elenu becheskas chavedim. Guys, hamuchzakim elenu. I know I said those words when we learned the Mishnah. That one of the in the introduction. One of the differences from going from Ama'aretz to Neman versus going from Neman to a Chaver is that to become a Neman, all you need is the Kabbalah. All you need is the Kabbalah. By going from Neman to a Chaver, not only do you have to make all of these specific commitments, but you don't get the status until for 30 days, as far as we know, you're adhering to your commitment. So when you have to make it in front of 3 people, it's not only in front of 3 people that made the commitment in public. That's not enough. You have to make it in front of 3 chavedim that are already muchzakim eleinu bechaskas chavedim. Guys, keep your finger in that Rashirilli. In other words, Who has to make it? We learned this also in the last year regarding to becoming a Neman. Everyone. Whereas even though we know you to be a scholar, even a Talmud Chacham. So what was the whole issue is, we're saying in the beginning of the Gemara today that, it's not that we don't have Nemanos. For him to say that it's not Mukhshar, we believe. Why? Because we're not saying that people are liars. We are saying that people are ignorant. Now, you have a guy who's a Talmud Chacham, you would think this guy we know is not ignorant. Right? He keeps on, he learns the 3 Prakam Rambam. That means once a year he reviews all of the dinim of Tuman Tara. He knows. It's not enough. Furthermore, one second. Avol, however, Chacham Sheyoshev B'Yeshiva. Now, what's the Chacham Sheyoshev B'Yeshiva? According to some, if someone is teaching Torah in public, according to some, I know it doesn't sound that way. Let me just find this inside. I'm going to find these words in a moment. Avol Chacham Sheyoshev B'Yeshiva. Ein tzarich lekabel olav. Gavaldik. Why? Shekvar kibel olav misha sheyashav. That's the Rashi Eliyah says. So look inside the Rashi Eliyah. It's six lines from the top. Shekvar kibel olav ma'atzmai ve'ein tzarich libdek achrav. The kiven the malamet Torah barabim is mizdahir. In other words, for a person to become a teacher, one of the prerequisites, today in the Cheder, you have to sign, I don't know about what, I don't know. You have to make such a Kabbalah. But there's one difference. It's a Kabbalah he has to make. The Rashi Eliyah was explaining, the Bryce is saying, Shekfar Kibalo. Everyone has to make it. The question is, do we have to give this guy a 30-day period? Do you have to wait 30 days to see if he's keeping it? So if a person is already a teacher for 30 days or more, that's what the Rashi Eliyah is saying. He doesn't have to make it now because he for sure was already Mekabel, and you don't have to go and check him out for 30 days because now we say that since the guy is a public teacher, it gives him some higher level of the money. So you don't have to make a bedika on him. You don't have to keep your eyes on him. There's no probation.
This is somebody who's teaching.
That's what the Rashi Eliyah is saying. It's the only exception for someone who doesn't have to become a chaver. If he's teaching, you presume it's like he did it. Maybe Kibal Olav means he doesn't even have to make it in public.
Yerushalmi Yeshiva means he's teaching.
Yerushalmi Yeshiva means that's the way he's saying. That's the way.
Student.
Not a student. The Talmud Chacham is a student. That's what he's saying. Maybe not everyone agrees with him. I don't know where he got it from, but that's a very, very interesting. Now, hold on. Oh, I got it. Now, Omar Rab Law, which is Rabbi Law. So, Rabbi Law is an Amoira. He's not arguing with the Braisa. Very good. He is qualifying the Braisa. Who shekibel olav mishar shayno. That's important. Wow. In other words, clear. The only difference is where we said it correctly, guy. The only difference is that you don't have to make a bedika. There's no prohibition. But that he needed to formally make a Kabbalah, even a teacher has to make that Kabbalah. But you might have understood the Braisa Shekfar Kibel Olav privately. So Rabbi is saying, no. Even the guy that's teaching that everyone has to make a Kabbalah b'fnei shloisha, that's a given. The only step down is that you don't have to be boidik achrav, because you do need the 30 days. You don't have to do the 30 days. Now, Rabbi Yossi is asking on Rabbi Ilah's qualification of the Braisa. Mishar shoinam lamali chaver afilu amaretz. Look inside the Rashi the way he explains the kasha. But Rabbi Yossi makshi ihachi, guys, right? You see, like eight lines into the right column. Lamali chaver sheyoshev b'yeshiva. In other words, umahanele yeshivas. Afilu amaretz nami imekabel lemon. So, where do we have any? Is there any maila that the person who's a yoshev b'yeshiva bringing to the table? If everyone has to be mekabel. Now, when Rabbi Ilah savar dafilu zaken yoshev b'yeshiva boye kabbalah ella, the way we explained correctly, the boye bedika im noyeg betzina betoich beisoy the mistama ligon of das abriyos. That detail Rabbi Yossi didn't have. We knew it because the Rashi Eliyah said it. Other than what's not written, that you don't have to check after him. You don't have to check after him. If you take that out, Rabbi Yossi doesn't understand how can Rabbi Ila explain the Braisa the way he did, because then there's no difference. Then the Braisa should have says Afilu Talmud Chacham, which means everyone.
No,
But then he's but Avol Chacham. What's the Avol Chacham? In other words, the Rashi Ilio is already giving you the answer that the Gemara doesn't give. Rabbi Yossi didn't see inside the words of Rabbi Ila that there is Yebedika, Nobedika. That's not written explicitly. So therefore, he's asking that if Rabbi Yossi argues, Rabbi Yossi is saying the pshat and the brisa is that if someone is a teacher of Torah, he doesn't even have to make the Kabbalah. So in other words, we have a machloikas between Rabbi Ila and Rabbi Yossi how to understand the brisa. According to Rabbi Yossi, a teacher doesn't even have to make the Kabbalah. According to Rabbi Ila, he does have to make the Kabbalah. What's special? You don't have to be voidek achrav, which means someone else. That's where we got it from. But to become a nemon, you don't have to be voidek achrav. A guy makes a hachlat to berabim that he believes in. When it comes to becoming a chaver, you do have this concept. Yitaka made a beautiful hachlat. Good for you. We got to check up on. We have to check on who is exempted from this, having this checking up on them. The teacher. Yeah. Okay.
Rabbi, don't you have to be a chaver to be a teacher anyway?
No, absolutely not. Well, yes, no. If you're going to teach in the yeshiva, they're going to make you make a commitment. But if the purpose of education would be to acquire information, then you would not have to become a chaver. You would have to be a scholar. Acher was the teacher of Rabbi Meir. Acher was no chaver. Acher was a big sinner. Okay, so but that the rule is if someone is teaching, according to Rabbi Yossi, you don't even have to make the hachlat. He gives more credence to a teacher. Amazing. So now that we have a machlokes, right? So now the Gemara says that Asya, that Abullah, Kirab Shimon ben Lakish. I'm going to show you that Reish Lakish had the same approach of Rabbi Ila, which is Rab Shimon ben Lakish have a solid Rabbi Ila in the Bay Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Yanai passed away. And whenever you want to know what the tzaddik behaved, how do you do that? The best we have is you ask his family members. So Reish Lakish once went to the house, to the Bay Rabbi Yanai, when the woman there saw Reish Lakish enter, they ran away from him. What did we learn today? That midrabanan, if you're not yet a formal chaver, midrabanan, your body has a tumah, but your body's only tummy on the level of Rishon, which means the most you can do is be metama food, which is not the end of the world. You can't be metama adam and kalim, only earth and a mashkin. The clothing of Amoritz, the clothing we have a suspect that Anida, his wife, well, she was Anida or Zava Saranat, and that will impart to the clothing tumas midras midrabanan, because we don't know, but that's much worse. And clothing that's tummy on the level of an av can impart tuma even if you brush by it. So they were very careful to stay away from it.
He wasn't from enough.
Amaloin, Abba, lachoin the base. So wow, you come from a household where you guys were properly taught how to keep the Torah. There was a father. There was a man over here in the house. In other words, he acknowledged, he saw from their behavior that's taka zoidav zayin, that ama aretz ani eitz alat harois. Now, the kasha is if Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Lakish was a teacher, if Rabbi Yossi would be right, if a teacher doesn't have to do a public kabbalah, then Reish Lakish would not be ama aretz. Reish Lakish never made this commitment.
He's saying this on himself.
He said good. He says you guys were taught well. All of that proves that Reish Lakish, like Rabbi Ila, were of the opinion that even if you have someone who is a teacher of Torah, they have to make the formal Kabbalah. And if they don't do it, they have a status of the Amoritz. Midrabanan.
He knew it. Why did he do it?
That's a kasha.
How is this a proof?
No, it's a proof against Rabbi Yossi, Danny. Rabbi Ila, the machloikas with the Braisa said, Avol, Yoshev be yeshiva. Yoshev be yeshiva means a teacher.
Yeah.
Avol, Yoshev be yeshiva, one notch down. There's one less demand. That's the way Rabbi Ila learned. Rabbi Yossi rejected that. Rabbi Yossi didn't know of that. Rabbi Yossi said it must be that a teacher doesn't have to make a Kabbalah. If Rabbi Yossi would,
they ran away from Rish Lakish, Zachariah, they hold like
Rabbi Lo, because if they would hold like Rabbi Yossi, he was a teacher. Now Rish Lakish knew that he didn't make a Kabbalah. So you ask him, why didn't he make a Kabbalah? I don't know.
how would they have known if he made a Kabbalah or not?
It was probably no.
How do they know what Rish Lakish made or not?
Because Rabbi Yanai told him, stay away from this guy. He's like a big guy. And
Yanai passed away already.
doesn't matter, but that's why they knew. They were taught well. You push it, you see, how many times did we learn also when it came to certain words, how to entice words? We learned it from the household of Rabbi. There are many stories in the Gemara that we rely on the behavior and on the understanding of the household members, even of a shivcha. The Beis Rebbe, we learned that many times.
Yeah, this was probably like, I don't know if this is the first story I'm hearing, but this was probably common practice when it kept too entire. People were just running away from each other, no?
COVID.
So let me say like this, that there was no Beis HaMikdash. You have to understand something properly. Don't forget, Midori Raisa, there's no need for you to remain taught. There's no need for you to remain taught. But certain people were machmer to eat their food on the state of Tara. Once you have to eat your food on the state of Tara, you have to remain taught. Not everyone took upon themselves that stringency. It sounds like a Kovina Shlokish didn't. Even though he for sure made sure that his wife, Denida, would not sit on the skull. Huh? It makes sense.
The whole thing sounds pretty impossible.
No, but
Think about it.
no, Perushim.
Rish Lakish, where's he getting his food from?
That's why it could be.
And like, come on, you're talking about.
Now you know why they're called Perushim. I agree. There's no Beis HaMikdash. It's not about the temple. They were Perushim. They ran away from people. They stayed away from people. Let's go by. It says in our Torah, we learned in the Bryce that hunane lechabura. Another exception. That for you have to make your commitment in front of a chabura. Then what's a chabura? 3 people, according to the Rashidili. What happens if the man in the house made that commitment? So everyone has to make the commitment, but at least we're lenient. His wife and his kids only have to make the commitment to him, and that's good enough. However, is tanoi tanei? No, not even that. Every single member has to make the commitment in public. Now the Gemara is going to suggest that v'loy palik. Don't make this into a machlekes tanoim. Kan bitfulin la'avim. Let's go tfulin la'avim. You have to look at the marafulda. Let's go somchen al shulchan avim. That's the way many readers just read the nice kalam. In other words, if they're eating off your table, so there is less demand of them to make the commitment in public. When they make the commitment to you, they're going to keep it. You know why? Because you're providing their needs. The second braisa that holds that even your children have to make this commitment in front of a chabura is b'she'enim tefillin la'avim. That in America, over 40, under 40, and depends. It depends if the father has money. So today you have parents that are saying, I don't know. It depends on in other words, the way I understand that if I'm eating off your table and I make a commitment to you, I feel bound by it because you're supporting me. Yeah. That's why you don't demand for them to make it in front of 3. The point of both is that we don't say, since the head of the family became a chaver, by default, he's going to keep up the standard in the song. We don't say that. Everyone has to make that commitment. It's very difficult to be a chaver. It's very difficult. Let's go back. Tani Rab Chalafta ben Shol. Gedolim nanim lechabura. Same idea, right? Let's go with the same idea. Gedolim, that's what you're saying. Gedolim normally presumed is not soyim mechashok anavim. Tanim is enough. Na'anim loy. Now let's begin. I know it's late. We have another minute. I want to begin with the following because we're gonna begin a whole new topic. It's so complicated, tum and tara, and the behavior modification. I would say that way. The behavior is so great that a person cannot just say, "I'm becoming a chaver." Even if he's going to say every single word we had in the Mishnah, it's not enough. It's a step by step. First, you have to make a hachlata, tane, makrivin, liknofayim. Makrivin means we befriend him, we accept him, by him first making a hachlata regarding his wings. It's an interesting lashon. Wings are hands. When you wash natilas yadayim, one of the things you do is that you lift your hands, and when you're in the state of lifting the hands, it's called kanafayim. Gavaldi. No, it's first you have to commit to do natilas yadayim before eating chulin, which is a big chiddush. Why? Because I don't have to eat midoraisa chulin If I'm tamei, I can be metame chulin. Guys, I want to say one thing. If I am tamei, I can eat chulin tamei. But if a person, but since your stam yudayim are shniyos, even though chulin cannot become a shlishi, you have to make sure that you wash your hands before touching chulin. I want to say touching, that's important. We can stop with that, we'll continue. Because eating, one of the takanas of Shlomo HaMelech is before, that's Bezman Bayis Rishon. Before eating chulin, I have to do Netilas Yadayim. That cannot be the chaver shot. That's a basic. Chaver means that nowadays, right, when you touch food, you don't wash your hands until Yadayim. And why would you have to? We don't have to. We're speaking about chulin. Even though stam yadayim shniyos, so what? I'm not going to be matam of the food. One of the upgrades, chumras, that they had to make is that I will not touch food prior to washing my hands. And that's something that from when you make that resolution until you're becoming accustomed to doing so, you need time. Now, the Brayso doesn't say how much time. So it's a step by step by step. First, makrivim liknofayim. And we're going to, and then, we'll stop